I still remember the first time I realized my childhood home wasn't just a house. It was a piece of me. The creaky wooden staircase, the window seat where I spent hours with my sketchbooks, the backyard where I planted my first tree with my dad. Every corner of that house carried a memory. For years, no matter how difficult things got between me and my family, that home was the one place where I felt I truly belonged. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. That's why, when I learned that my parents had sold it without even telling me, it felt like they hadn't just sold a building. They had sold my past, my comfort, and my foundation. And the worst part? They only came crawling back to me when the deal went sour, and they realized I was the only one who could save them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. Growing up, I was never the golden child. That title belonged to my older brother, Daniel. Daniel was everything my parents wanted in a child. Ambitious, outgoing, athletic. He was their pride and joy, the one they bragged about at every family gathering. Daniel got into honors classes. Daniel made the varsity team. Daniel has such a bright future. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one, the dreamer. I loved art and books, and while my grades were good, they weren't spectacular. I wasn't the kind of child who made my parents beam with pride. I was the one who stayed in the background, often unnoticed, sometimes dismissed. My parents never outright said they were disappointed in me, but their actions spoke loudly enough. Whenever relatives came over, they would parade Daniel around, talking about his achievements, while I sat silently, clutching my sketch pad. If I ever tried to share something, like the time I won a local art competition, it was brushed off with a polite smile and a quick change of topic. I learned early on that my role in the family wasn't to shine. It was to stay quiet and not make waves. The house, though, was different. It was my sanctuary. In that house, I could be myself. I had my own little corner in the attic where I painted. The walls splattered with colors my mother often complained about but never forced me to clean. I had my secret hiding spot under the stairs where I kept my journals. The garden was my escape, a place where I could breathe when the weight of feeling invisible became too heavy. That house held me together when my family seemed intent on pulling me apart. As we got older, Daniel went off to college and became everything my parents dreamed of. He studied business, interned at a big firm, and was always surrounded by people who admired him. I, on the other hand, pursued art and literature. My parents didn't see the value in it. "You'll never make a living drawing pictures," my father once said, with a dismissive wave. My mother just sighed and said, "You need to be more practical, like your brother." I stopped trying to make them. Understand, I knew my path was different, and while it hurt to not have their support, I told myself it didn't matter, but deep down, it did. Every child wants their parents to be proud of them. Every child wants to feel like they belong. The years passed, and I built my own life, slowly and quietly. I worked odd jobs while pursuing my passion, saving every penny, and eventually, I managed to establish a small but growing career as a freelance illustrator. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine, and I was proud of it, even if my parents never asked about my work. The turning point came one evening when I visited my parents after months of not seeing them. I expected the usual coldness, the constant comparison to Daniel, but nothing prepared me for what I found. My childhood home, the only place that ever felt like mine, was stripped bare. The pictures were off the walls, the furniture gone, the warmth drained from every corner. I froze in the living room, staring at the empty space where the old sofa used to sit, where Daniel and I had once fought over the remote, where I used to curl up with a book while my mother baked in the kitchen. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, we sold the house," my mother said casually, as if she were telling me she'd just changed the curtains. Sold the house, just like that. No discussion, no warning, no consideration of what it meant to me. I felt my throat tighten. Without telling me, my father gave me a look that was half irritation, half disbelief. "It's our house. We didn't need your permission." Those words cut deeper than any insult ever had. I wasn't expecting them to need my permission, but I had expected them to care enough to at least let me know, to acknowledge that the house meant something to me. Instead, they treated it like a transaction, like it was nothing more than bricks and wood. I left that night without saying much. I didn't trust myself to speak. Inside, I was raging, but also heartbroken. It wasn't just about the house, it was about what it represented. Years of being sidelined, years of feeling like I didn't matter, all culminating in this final betrayal. What I didn't know at that moment was that selling the house was only the beginning of the story. Because life has a funny way of flipping the script. The same parents who dismissed me, who sold away the only place where I felt at home, would soon find themselves on their knees, begging me for help. And when that day came, I had to decide whether I would finally get my revenge, or let the past go. The weeks after discovering the house was sold were some of the hardest I had ever experienced. I couldn't shake the image of those empty rooms out of my head. It felt like my childhood had been erased in one ruthless sweep. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see my old bedroom stripped bare, the marks on the wall where my posters once hung, the faded paint in the hallway where my height had been measured year after year, all of it gone, sold to strangers who would never know the memories woven into those walls. I tried not to think about it, but grief has a way of sneaking up on you. I'd be walking down the street and catch the scent of fresh paint, and suddenly I'd be back in the kitchen watching my mother repaint the cabinets while complaining about the messy fingerprints I left behind. I'd hear a child laughing and be transported to summer afternoons in the backyard, chasing fireflies with Daniel until the sky turned dark. Every little reminder felt like another stab in the heart. My parents didn't notice my silence, or maybe they didn't care. When I called my mother a week later to ask about the sale, she brushed me off. It was the right decision, she said. The house was old, too much maintenance. We needed the money anyway. I wanted to scream. It wasn't just a house, it was a lifetime. But I bit my tongue because I knew if I let my emotions spill out, she'd only call me dramatic. That was the word she always used when I expressed how I felt. Dramatic, sensitive, overreacting. Daniel, of course, thought the whole thing was practical. It's just a building, he told me when I confronted him. Mom and Dad had to do what was best financially. Stop being so attached, it was easy for him to say. Daniel never cared about the house the way I did. He had always been too busy chasing success, looking forward instead of backward. To him, memories were disposable, just like relationships. I realized then that maybe I had been foolish to expect anyone in my family to understand. So I did what I'd always done. I turned inward. I poured my feelings into my art, painting furiously late into the night, capturing pieces of the house from memory, the crooked mailbox at the end of the driveway, the ivy crawling up the side wall, the old oak tree that stood guard by my window. Each brushstroke was a small act of defiance, a way of keeping the house alive, even if it was gone in reality. But grief wasn't the only thing brewing inside me. There was anger, too. Anger at being excluded, dismissed, treated like my feelings didn't matter. And beneath that anger was something even more dangerous: determination. For the first time in years, I felt a fire in my chest. If my parents thought I was insignificant, if they believed my choices were foolish, then I would prove them wrong. The universe seemed to conspire in my favor around that time. My freelance work picked up. One project led to another, and before I knew it, I was being approached by a small publishing company to illustrate a children's book. That book turned into 3, and then 5, and suddenly I was no longer scraping by. My name was being recognized, and my art was reaching places I'd only dreamed of. I didn't tell my parents much about it, partly because they never asked, and partly because a part of me wanted to keep my success hidden until the right moment. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing I was building something of my own, far away from their judgments and expectations. Months passed. And the wound of losing the house slowly began to scar over. I still missed it terribly, but I told myself I had to move forward. That was until the phone call that changed everything. It was a rainy Thursday evening when my phone buzzed with my father's number. We weren't particularly close, so it was unusual for him to call. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" His voice was tense, uncharacteristically strained. "We need to talk." My stomach nodded. "About what?" "It's about the house," he said, and just like that, my heart lurched. I sat up straighter, gripping the phone tightly. "What about it? You already sold it." There was a long pause on the other end, followed by a sigh. "We made a mistake." I blinked, not sure I'd heard him correctly. My father never admitted mistakes, ever. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. "The people we sold it to, they're reselling it, and they've jacked up the price. We can't afford to buy it back." I felt a strange mix of emotions flooding me: shock, confusion, even a sliver of dark satisfaction. "Why would you want it back?" "Because we didn't realize what we had until it was gone," he admitted quietly, almost like it pained him to say the words. "Your mother, she regrets it. We both do. That house was worth more than money." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Here were the same people who had told me it was just a building, now confessing they wanted it back. The irony was almost too much to bear. Then came the part that made my blood run cold. "We heard you've been doing well with your art." The way he said the word dripped with condescension, even now. "We thought maybe you could help us buy it back." And there it was, the truth. They didn't just want me, they wanted my money. I sat there in stunned silence, listening to the rain tapping against the window, the weight of his request pressing down on me. My parents had sold the one thing I treasured most without even asking me. Now they were begging me to fix their mistake. In that moment, I realized the power had shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the overlooked child. I was the one holding the cards. But the question was, what was I going to do with that power? I didn't answer my father right away. I let the silence stretch, partly because I wanted him to feel it. For once in my life, I wasn't scrambling to please them or to defend myself. I had the upper hand, and they knew it. "You want me," I said slowly, "to spend my money buying back the house you sold without even telling me?" My father cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "It wasn't like that. We thought it was the right decision at the time, but now we realize—" "You realize what?" I snapped, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "That it meant something? That it wasn't just four walls and a roof? Because I told you that. I always told you that, and you ignored me." There was a long pause. For the first time in my life, my father sounded small when he spoke. "We didn't think you cared that much." That sentence broke something in me. How could they not know? How could they live with me for years and not see the way I clung to that house, the way I breathed life into its corners, the way it was the only place where I ever felt safe? I didn't say anything else. I just hung up. That night, I lay awake replaying the conversation in my head. My parents had sold away the most important piece of my childhood like it was nothing, and now they wanted me to rescue them. Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Another part wanted to cry. And then there was the darkest part, the part that whispered maybe this was my chance. Maybe this was the moment to make them feel even a fraction of the pain I had carried for years. The next morning, my phone lit up with messages. First from my mother, "Please, sweetheart, let's talk. We need your help." Then from Daniel, "Mom and Dad are really stressed. If you can help them, you should." I almost threw my phone across the room. Daniel, as usual, was siding with them, playing the dutiful son. He didn't understand what it was like to be overlooked, dismissed, belittled. He never would. For the next week, the calls kept coming. My mother tried guilt, reminding me of all the times they had sacrificed for me. My father tried logic, talking about family legacy and how the house needed to stay in our name. Daniel tried shame, telling me I was being selfish for not helping. But what none of them seemed to realize was that I wasn't the same person I used to be. I wasn't the quiet, invisible child sitting in the corner with a sketch pad. I wasn't the one begging for scraps of attention. I had built myself up brick by brick, and now I had something they wanted. Still, I couldn't ignore the truth. I did want the house back. Not for them, for me. The thought of strangers walking its halls, repainting the walls, tearing down the garden. It made me sick. If I could save it, wasn't I saving a piece of myself too? The internal battle tore at me for days. Every time I thought about saying yes, I imagined my parents smirking, taking the credit, twisting the story into one where I had saved the family. And every time I thought about saying no, I felt that ache in my chest, the one that reminded me of childhood nights staring out the attic window, whispering my dreams into the dark. It was during one of these restless nights that I had a dream. I was back in the house, sitting in my old room. The walls were covered in my childhood drawings, and the bau, smell of my mother's baking drifted up from the kitchen. For a moment, I felt at peace. But then, in the dream, strangers walked in and began tearing everything down, ripping the drawings, smashing the furniture, repainting the walls a color I hated. I screamed for my parents to stop them, but they just stood there, watching silently. I woke up drenched in sweat, my chest heaving, and I knew then I couldn't let the house slip away forever. But if I was going to buy it back, I was going to do it on my terms, not theirs. The next day, I called my father. He picked up immediately, like he had been waiting by the phone. "Have you thought about it?" he asked, his tone hopeful. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'll buy the house back." I heard my mother gasp in the background, her voice trembling with relief. "Oh, thank God," but I interrupted. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me. And if I buy it, it's mine, not ours, not the family's. Mine." The silence that followed was heavy. Then my father said coldly, "That's not how this works." I smiled bitterly. "It's exactly how it works. You wanted my help, and these are my conditions. Take it or leave it." My mother's voice broke in, softer this time. "Please, just don't take it away from us completely." Her words cut deep, because wasn't that exactly what they had done to me? Taken away something that was mine? I hung up again before they could argue further. My hands were shaking, my heart racing. But there was no going back now. I had made my choice. I was going to buy back the house. But in doing so, I knew I was stepping into dangerous territory, because once I had it, the balance of power in my family would shift forever, and not everyone was going to like that. The next morning, I began the process of tracking down the current owner of the house. The real estate listing had long since been taken down, but a neighbor still remembered the sale. I learned the house had been sold to a young couple who were planning to renovate it completely. My heart sank. The thought of them tearing apart the walls I had grown up with, ripping up the floorboards I had danced on, and repainting my childhood colors with whatever they liked. It made my stomach twist in knots. I had to act fast. I contacted a local real estate agent I trusted. Explaining the situation carefully, I asked if there was any way to approach the couple and make an offer. At first, he was skeptical. "It's not exactly common," he said, "for someone to want to buy back a house from a new owner, especially when they've already started renovations. They might not even consider it." "I don't care," I said. "I'll offer whatever it takes. Just get me a meeting." Within a week, I was standing on the driveway of my old house, heart hammering in my chest. The neighborhood had changed slightly, new trees planted, old fences replaced, but the house itself remained largely the same. The familiar curve of the front porch, the chipped blue paint on the door, even the cracked windows I had tried to fix as a teenager. All of it hit me like a punch to the chest. The young couple, a man and a woman in their early 30s, greeted me politely but with cautious suspicion. I introduced myself, trying to explain that I had grown up here, that this house meant the world to me. I watched as they exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of empathy and wariness. The woman spoke first. We understand that it's important to you, she said carefully. But we've already invested a lot in the house. Renovations, deposits, planning. We can't just undo everything for sentimental reasons. I know, I said quickly. And I'm not asking you to. I'm offering to buy it. Whatever price it takes, whatever it costs to compensate you for your work. I need it back. Please understand, it's not about the money, it's about my life. They were quiet for a moment. Then the man said, "It's unusual, but if you can match our investment and the cost of the house itself, we could consider it." I nodded, barely able to breathe. I will. I promise. I just need a chance. Over the next few days, I worked tirelessly, pulling together every resource I had. I negotiated with my bank, contacted a lawyer, and even reached out to an old mentor who had invested in real estate before. My parents called constantly, unaware that I was actually moving forward. Each time, they tried to guilt me, to persuade me, to remind me of all the sacrifices they had made. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Finally, the deal was set. I would buy the house back at a price slightly above market value, enough to cover the couple's expenses and their inconvenience. My heart swelled with a mix of triumph and apprehension. Soon the house would be mine again, but owning it meant facing the reality of my family, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that confrontation. The day I signed the papers, I stood in the living room, my hands shaking as I traced the familiar grooves in the wooden banister. I could almost hear my younger self laughing upstairs, running through the hallways, imagining a world without limits. I had brought that world back to life, but I knew it would never be the same. That evening, my parents called. They were elated, their voices filled with relief and something else, hope, I realized, that I would forgive them entirely. But I wasn't sure I could. Not yet. Not after everything they had taken from me. "I hope you understand," I said finally, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "The house is back. But it's not about you anymore. It's about me. And if you think buying it back erases the past, you're wrong." They didn't reply immediately. The silence was heavy, almost palpable. Then my mother whispered, We wanted it in the family." I swallowed, feeling the weight of years of hurt and frustration. "It is in the family," I said slowly, "but not the way you imagined. I'm the one who decides now, not you, not anyone else." For the first time in my life, I felt truly powerful. The house was mine. My childhood, my memories, my pain, they were mine. And for the first time, I realized that reclaiming it wasn't just about walls and doors. It was about taking control of my story and refusing to let anyone rewrite it without my consent. That night, I walked through the room slowly, letting my fingers brush over the familiar surfaces. Every corner held a memory, some painful, some joyful, but all of them mine. And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, fragile but undeniable. I knew the journey wasn't over. There would be conversations, confrontations, and challenges. My parents weren't going to give up easily, and I had to be ready for that. But for now, standing in my reclaimed home, I allowed myself to savor the victory. It was small, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. Not just at the house, but at the future I was finally starting to claim for myself. The morning after I officially regained ownership of my childhood home, I woke with a strange mixture of triumph and unease. Walking through the empty rooms, sunlight spilling across the floorboards, I realized that reclaiming the house wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The first call I received that day was from my mother. Her voice was trembling, a mixture of relief and desperation. "Please, can we come over just to see it?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the door on them and never look back. But another part, the part that had grown up with them, depended on them, and still longed for their approval, softened at her request. "Okay," I said finally, my voice measured, "but only for a short visit. And we need to be clear, I'm not doing this for you. This is for me, too." They arrived within the hour, looking older than I remembered, faces marked by guilt and regret. My father tried to make small talk, commenting on the new landscaping, the fresh coat of paint. But every word seemed forced, like he was testing the waters, unsure if I would snap back. We walked through the rooms together, and I couldn't help but notice how tentative they were. My mother's fingers hovered over the furniture as if touching something sacred might break it. My father lingered in the kitchen, tracing the counter with an absent-minded hand. They were outsiders in a place that had once been home, but now it was mine. "I can't believe you went through all of this for a house," my father said finally, his tone a mix of disbelief and grudging respect. "It's not just a house," I said sharply. "It's my childhood, my memories, my life. And you took that from me without asking. That's why I had to fight for it." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We didn't realize. We thought we were making things easier for everyone. We never meant to hurt you, I know that now," I said softly. "But it doesn't erase what happened. I had to reclaim it myself. You need to understand that there was a long silence, filled only by the creaking of the floorboards beneath our feet. Finally, my father nodded. "We understand. We do. And we're sorry." Truly, I wanted to believe him. I really did. But trust, once broken, is not easily repaired. I knew that forgiveness would take time, if it ever came at all. After they left, I locked the doors and walked through the house alone. I opened the old photo albums I had brought from my apartment, faded snapshots of birthdays, holidays, and long summer afternoons in the yard. Each picture was a reminder of what had been stolen from me and what I had fought to reclaim. Then I realized something important. The house itself wasn't what mattered most. It was the memories, the sense of self, and the control I had taken back over my own life. Owning the house was a symbol, a trophy, a testament to my perseverance, but the real victory was internal. I had reclaimed my power, my voice, and my story. In the weeks that followed, I started small renovations, painting the rooms in colors that reflected my taste rather than my parents', repairing the places that had been neglected over the years, and planting flowers in the garden that my younger self had dreamed about. Each act was therapeutic, a way to assert my independence and build a space that was truly mine. My parents called often, sometimes daily, asking about updates, offering to help or just wanting to talk. I responded sparingly, careful not to give in to old patterns of guilt or manipulation. I learned to navigate our interactions with boundaries, keeping the house as a shield and a sanctuary, rather than a battleground. Then came the neighborhood gatherings. Longtime neighbors stopped by, curious about the new owner who had bought back the house. They shared stories I hadn't remembered, tales of my childhood, of my parents' laughter and arguments, of the little things that had shaped the community. Listening to them, I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't expected. The house was more than a personal victory. It was a bridge between my past and the life I was creating for myself now. But not everything was easy. One evening, while I was cleaning the attic, I found an old box of my father's letters, unsent apologies, reflections on decisions he regretted, and notes that revealed he had felt trapped, misunderstood, and scared. Reading them, I felt a mix of anger and compassion. The man who had betrayed me was still my father, flawed and human, trying to navigate life in the best way he knew. It didn't excuse him, but it added layers to my understanding. Life was never black and white. It was messy, complicated, full of mistakes and attempts at redemption. Holding that realization, I began to see the possibility of a future where the past could coexist with the present, without either consuming the other. By the end of the month, I had begun hosting small gatherings at the house, inviting old friends and distant relatives, cautiously rebuilding relationships that had been strained or broken. Every laugh, every conversation, every shared memory reminded me why I had fought so hard. Not for the house itself, but for the life and connections it represented. Through all of this, My parents remained in the background, no longer commanding the narrative, no longer dictating my choices. They had become observers rather than actors in my story. And for the first time in my life, I felt like the author of my own fate. The house, once a symbol of loss and betrayal, had become a canvas for renewal, and I knew that no matter what happened next, I had reclaimed something far more valuable than walls and windows. I had reclaimed myself. Life in my reclaimed home settled into a rhythm, though it was far from predictable. Each day brought a mix of domestic chores, personal reflection, and the occasional visit from neighbors or old friends. The house was no longer a relic of the past. It was becoming a living, breathing space that reflected my choices and my personality. One morning, as I brewed coffee in the kitchen, I noticed a stack of unopened mail. Most of it was mundane, utility bills, flyers, and the occasional junk advertisement, but one envelope stood out. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. My heart sank slightly. Old fears flared, memories of my parents' betrayal still raw. I tore it open, bracing myself. The letter contained a notice about a property dispute. Apparently, the previous buyers who had owned my house briefly after my parents sold it had claimed some issues with the sale and taxes. The letter was polite, almost bureaucratic, but the threat was clear. If I didn't respond, I risked legal complications. For a moment, I felt panic. After all the effort to reclaim my home, could I lose it again over paperwork I didn't fully understand? I reminded myself to breathe, to stay grounded. I wasn't a child anymore. I could handle this. I picked up my phone and called a property lawyer I had researched weeks ago, someone who specialized in family estate issues. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Marissa, reassured me immediately. "Don't worry," she said. "These things happen more often than people think. Your parents' previous sale might have been sloppy, but we can resolve it. You've done everything by the book, and that counts." Relief washed over me, though tinged with lingering distrust. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Reclaiming the house wasn't just about fighting my parents. It was about navigating adulthood, asserting myself in the legal and practical world, and proving I could protect what mattered to me. Later that week, I decided to explore the house more thoroughly, venturing into rooms I had neglected. In the attic, I found old boxes filled with childhood toys, school projects, and letters I had written but never sent. I laughed as I read through them, marveling at my younger self's innocence and imagination. But there was also a pang of sadness. Memories of moments I couldn't relive, of milestones I had once assumed would belong to the same house forever. That evening, I sat in the living room, candlelight flickering across the walls, thinking about the strange mixture of emotions I had been feeling: pride, sorrow, nostalgia, and a deep, enduring sense of responsibility. Owning the house wasn't a passive gift. It required care, attention, and a willingness to confront the past. The following day, my parents called again. Their tone was hesitant, almost timid, as if they were afraid I might reject them outright. My mother asked if they could come over to help unpack some old furniture, suggesting it would make the house feel more like family again. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say yes, to allow them back into my life on my terms, but I also knew that boundaries were crucial. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I need to do this myself. I'll let you know when I need help. For now, please respect that this is my project." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then my father sighed, resigned. "I understand. We just hope you find some peace here." I felt a small flicker of something, compassion maybe. "Thank you," I replied softly. "I'm trying." Days turned into weeks, and I immersed myself in the process of turning the house into a home. I repainted walls, refinished the wooden floors, and replaced old fixtures. With every task, I felt more in control, more empowered. The house was no longer just a symbol of what was taken from me. It was a testament to resilience, creativity, and independence. One afternoon, while tending the garden, I overheard a group of children playing across the street. Their laughter reminded me of my own childhood, the summers spent running barefoot in the yard, the smell of grass and fresh paint. A wave of emotion hit me. Anger, yes, but also gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance, for the opportunity to reclaim a piece of my history, and for the understanding that my life was truly my own to shape. That night, I found myself writing in a journal, something I hadn't done in years. I detailed the challenges, the victories, and the small moments of joy that had become part of my daily routine. Writing helped me process everything, grounding me in the reality that the house was more than wood and stone. It was a vessel for memory, growth, and self-discovery. Then, unexpectedly, my parents reached out again. But this time, it was different. They weren't asking to come over. Instead, they asked if I could help them organize their own home, a smaller apartment where they had moved after selling the house. They were seeking guidance, perhaps even redemption. I agreed, cautiously. I knew that forgiveness and reconciliation wouldn't happen overnight. But I also realized that helping them, on my terms, could be a step toward healing. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about creating a future where the mistakes of yesterday didn't define tomorrow. As I walked through the rooms of my home that night, the lights dimmed and the air still, I felt a sense of clarity. The house had survived betrayal, neglect, and uncertainty, but it was stronger for it, just like me. I had faced the pain, fought for what was mine, and emerged with something far greater than property: autonomy, perspective, and a renewed sense of purpose. And as I drifted to sleep, I knew that the journey was far from over. Life would continue to challenge me, to test my limits, and to confront me with unexpected twists. But now, I had proven to myself that I could face those challenges, stand my ground, and create a life that was authentically mine. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly at home. The weeks following my parents' request to help them with their new apartment became a strange balancing act. On one hand, I wanted to protect the autonomy I had fought so hard to reclaim in my childhood home. On the other, I felt a sense of responsibility, and perhaps a desire to see them genuinely make amends. The first visit to their apartment was awkward. It wasn't the spacious house I had grown up in. It was a compact space filled with furniture that felt like leftovers from the home they had sold. The walls were bare, the floors creaked, and the air smelled faintly of old polish and regret. My parents looked smaller somehow, diminished by the life they had created without my consent. "Thanks for coming," my mother said, her voice soft. We really need guidance. We don't want to mess this up like we did before." I nodded, keeping my emotions in check. "It's fine. Let's start with one room at a time." We began with the living room. I suggested rearranging the furniture to maximize space and natural light. My father grumbled initially, resistant to change, but gradually he began to see the sense in what I was proposing. It was a slow process, punctuated by small victories, moving a couch here, hanging a mirror there, placing a few decorative touches that made the room feel warmer. As the day progressed, conversation shifted from logistics to memories. My parents reminisced about the house I now lived in, the one they had sold without asking. Their voices were tinged with nostalgia and at times, regret. I listened silently, absorbing their words, feeling the sting of betrayal mix with a cautious curiosity about their perspective. "I sometimes wonder," my father said quietly, "if we made a mistake. Maybe we should have asked you first." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "You did make a mistake, but what matters now is how we move forward. You can't change the past, but you can make different choices today." There was a long silence, heavy with unspoken emotions. Then my mother reached out and touched my hand gently. "Thank you for helping us, even after everything." The sincerity in her voice surprised me. For the first time, I felt a crack in the wall I had built around my heart. It didn't erase the past, but it opened a tiny door for dialogue, for understanding, and perhaps, eventually, for forgiveness. Over the next several visits, we tackled different rooms: kitchen, bedroom, bathroom. Each space presented its own challenges: peeling wallpaper, outdated appliances, clutter from decades of accumulated possessions. I found myself falling into the role of teacher, guiding them through organizational techniques, showing them how to prioritize and declutter, and encouraging them to make choices that reflected their current lives rather than their past mistakes. During one session, while sorting through a stack of old photographs, I stumbled upon a picture of the three of us in the backyard of my childhood home. I was a small child, grinning from ear to ear, my parents smiling proudly behind me. The sight hit me unexpectedly. The memory was bittersweet, a reminder of what we had lost and a glimpse of what had once been beautiful. "Do you remember this?" my mother asked, her eyes misty. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I do. I was happy there. We all were." She sighed. "We didn't understand how much it meant to you back then. We thought we were making a practical decision." "And you were wrong," I said softly, though I kept my tone measured. "But I see now that you're trying to do better. That counts for something." For the first time, I felt a shift in the dynamic between us. It wasn't total reconciliation, it never would be overnight, but there was movement. A fragile bridge was forming, built on acknowledgement, effort, and the recognition of past mistakes. As I drove home that evening, my mind wandered back to my own house, the rooms I had worked on, the small victories I had achieved, the sense of control and independence I had regained. It all contrasted sharply with the tentative progress I had witnessed in my parents' apartment. And yet, the contrast was instructive. It reminded me that growth, whether personal or familial, required patience, consistency, and humility. In the days that followed, I reflected on boundaries. Helping my parents was one thing. Letting them encroach upon my life was another. I set clear limits. Our visits would be structured, short, and purposeful. Emotional labor would be shared, not solely my responsibility. And most importantly, my home remained my sanctuary, a place where my decisions and desires came first. Despite the careful structure, I found moments of unexpected joy. Watching my parents adapt, seeing the pride on their faces when a room was transformed, hearing their tentative laughter as old memories surfaced. It reminded me of why I had chosen to engage. It wasn't just about property or past grievances. It was about fostering connection, however fragile, and building a future that could coexist with the lessons of the past. One evening, after a long day of work at their apartment, my father turned to me and said something that stopped me in my tracks. "You know, I never realized how much of ourselves we lost when we sold that house. We didn't just give up a building, we gave up a piece of who we were." I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "Yes, and now it's about reclaiming what we can, in our own ways. For you, it's about rebuilding your life here. For me, it's about protecting mine while learning to forgive." That night, I returned home and walked through my own rooms, the quiet hum of the house settling around me. The walls, once empty, now bore the marks of my effort and creativity. The floors, polished and clean, reflected the soft glow of the evening sun. And in that moment, I realized that reconciliation, growth, and self-assertion weren't mutually exclusive. They could coexist if navigated with care, awareness, and courage. As I prepared for bed, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The journey with my parents was far from over, but the first steps toward understanding had been taken. And in that fragile space between past betrayal and future hope, I found something invaluable: the ability to define my life on my own terms, while still allowing space for the people who had shaped it. The weeks turned into months, and the tentative rhythm I had established with my parents began to solidify. Our visits to their apartment became a ritual, a mix of practical work and guarded conversations that slowly peeled away layers of resentment. It wasn't perfect. Some days, old tensions flared, and words were exchanged that stung sharper than I expected. But even those moments revealed truths that were impossible to ignore. One Saturday morning, my mother called me in a voice that sounded uncharacteristically serious. "We need to talk," she said, almost hesitantly, "about the house and everything else." I agreed to come over, cautiously bracing myself. When I arrived, my father was sitting at the kitchen table, hands clasped together, his expression a mix of nervousness and resolve. "We've been talking," my mother began, "and we realize now how much we hurt you by selling your childhood home without asking. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a betrayal." I stayed silent, letting her words sink in. Silence, I realized, could be as powerful as speech. "We want to make things right," my father added. "We've been trying to make this apartment work, but it's not home. Not for us. And we know it will never be home for you again either. But if there's any way, we'd like your help in getting the house back." The words hit me like a punch. After all the work I had put into healing, into establishing boundaries, now they were asking me to essentially undo everything that had been done, to reopen a chapter I had tried to close. I felt a rush of conflicting emotions: anger, disbelief, and a strange, reluctant sympathy. "Do you realize what you're asking?" I finally said, my voice controlled but firm. "This isn't just about money, it's about trust, about respect, about choices you made without me." "Yes," my mother said softly, tears brimming in her eyes. "We know. And we're ready to do whatever it takes to earn your trust back." I took a deep breath, pacing the small living room. Buying the house back isn't simple. It's not just financial, it's emotional. We'd have to navigate all the legal and personal complications, not to mention the people who currently own it. "I understand," my father said. "We're not asking for guarantees. Just guidance. Maybe you can help us figure out if it's even possible." It was tempting. The idea of reclaiming my childhood home had a nostalgic pull I couldn't ignore. Every corner of that house carried memories. My first bike, the tree I climbed despite my mother's protests, the room where I had spent countless hours reading, imagining, growing. But it wasn't just nostalgia that made me hesitate. It was the awareness that reopening that door could also reopen old wounds. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "But you need to understand something. If we do this, it will be on my terms, and it will take time." They nodded, a mixture of relief and apprehension on their faces. I left their apartment that day with my mind buzzing. The notion of helping them reclaim the house was intoxicating, but it also carried risks. It wasn't just a property, it was a symbol, a battleground for trust, respect, and family dynamics. Over the next few days, I began researching the logistics of buying the house back. I contacted real estate agents, scoured property records, and explored the financial implications. The more I learned, the more complex the situation became. The current owners had purchased it in good faith, and convincing them to sell back wouldn't be simple or cheap. There were legal hurdles, negotiations, and the delicate balance of preserving relationships while asserting my own rights. But alongside the practical concerns, my mind kept returning to the emotional side of things. What did it mean to reclaim a house? Could it really repair the fractures that had formed between me and my parents? Or would it only create new tensions, new disappointments? I decided to discuss it with a close friend, someone who had always provided honest, unfiltered advice. Over coffee, I laid out the situation, the history, the emotions tangled up in the house, and my parents' request. "You have to be careful," my friend said, stirring their drink. "Sometimes going back doesn't fix anything. It just brings the past back to haunt you. But if you can set boundaries, if you can define what reclaiming it really means for you, maybe it's worth considering." Their words resonated. I realized that the decision wasn't just about the house or my parents. It was about me, my autonomy, my emotional well-being, and the principles I had fought to uphold. I called my parents the next evening. "I've been thinking," I began cautiously, "about the house, about helping you. I'm willing to explore options, but on one condition. I need to be fully in control of the process. I set the rules, handle the negotiations, and decide if it's feasible. Nothing happens without my say. There was silence on the other end, then a tentative agreement. "We understand," my mother said softly. "We trust your judgment." The next step was reaching out to the current owners. I drafted an email, carefully worded to express interest without imposing pressure. Days passed with no response, then a cautious reply. They were willing to discuss, but made it clear that any transaction would be at market value and that their attachment to the home was minimal but genuine. Negotiations began slowly. I met with them, toured the property, and discussed terms. Each conversation required diplomacy and emotional restraint. My parents were eager, sometimes too eager, but I reminded them repeatedly to stay patient. This wasn't just a financial decision. It was a negotiation that involved respect, trust, and careful management of everyone's expectations. Meanwhile, the emotional weight of the process began to take its toll. Revisiting the house stirred memories I hadn't faced in years. The backyard where I had learned to ride my bike, the kitchen where my parents and I had shared countless meals, the staircase where I had fallen once and scraped my knee. All of it was alive in my mind. The past and present collided, and I realized that reclaiming the house wasn't just about ownership. It was about confronting every layer of my childhood, every mistake, every joy, and every betrayal. Through it all, I remained committed to my principles. I reminded my parents that while we could explore the possibility, the ultimate decision rested with me. Boundaries were essential, not just for me, but for the health of our relationship. Every conversation reinforced the delicate balance we were trying to maintain between healing old wounds and creating a realistic path forward. As Chapter 8 drew to a close, I felt a strange mixture of anxiety and hope. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, the dream of reclaiming my childhood home felt tangible. More importantly, I understood that the process wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about rebuilding trust, respect, and connection. And as I looked out of my own window that evening, I realized that the story wasn't only about the house, it was about the family and the possibility of moving forward together, even after the deepest betrayals. Negotiations were progressing slower than I had anticipated, and each step forward seemed accompanied by 2 steps back. The current owners were reasonable, but their hesitations were rooted in more than financial concerns. They had grown attached to certain aspects of the house, the little quirks and personal touches that reminded them of their own lives. I understood that. I also understood that persuading them to part with something they valued would require patience, empathy, and careful strategy. I spent hours each night drafting emails, making calls, and running calculations. The financial side was one challenge, but the emotional side, the memory-laden history of the house, was another. Every time I walked through it, every time I revisited a corner of the backyard or a creaky step on the staircase, I felt a mix of nostalgia and grief. Memories of my childhood collided with the reality of how much had changed. The laughter, the arguments, the quiet nights reading in my room, they were all echoes now, shadows of a life that had been disrupted by my parents' decision. My parents, of course, were anxious. Every time I called them with an update, they pressed for speed, for action, for reassurance. I reminded them repeatedly that rushing would only make matters worse. Patience, I explained, was key. The process wasn't just about buying a house. It was about negotiating a delicate balance between the past, the present, and the future. One evening, I received a call from the owner's attorney. "We're willing to schedule a meeting," the voice said, "but be prepared for serious negotiations. They have their own terms, and they're not going to be flexible without reason." I relayed the news to my parents, and their excitement was palpable. For the first time in months, they seemed genuinely hopeful, but I couldn't allow myself to be swept up in their enthusiasm. I knew that hope without strategy was dangerous. The day of the meeting arrived, and I approached the house with a mixture of trepidation and determination. My parents waited in the car, a silent presence that both comforted and unsettled me. Walking through the front door, I felt the familiar creak of the floorboards, the familiar scent of the home I had loved and lost. The current owners greeted me warmly, but the air was charged with unspoken tension. We sat down in the living room, and I began by acknowledging the emotional value of the house. "I understand this home means something to you," I said. "It's not just an investment, it's memories, history, life lived." They nodded, visibly relieved by my acknowledgement. "Exactly," one of them said. "We didn't just buy a house. We made it ours. But we also understand your connection. That's why we're open to discussions." Negotiations began in earnest. Prices were discussed. Contingencies were laid out. Timelines were debated. Each proposal required careful consideration, balancing my parents' eagerness with the reality of the market and the owner's needs. I reminded myself constantly that this wasn't a battle, it was a collaboration. The goal wasn't to win, but to create a situation that respected everyone's interests, while reclaiming what had been lost. At one point, the discussion shifted to repairs and renovations. The owners mentioned improvements they had made: new wiring, updated plumbing, modernized kitchen appliances. I took notes, mentally calculating the cost of reversing or adapting these changes if we were to reclaim the house. My parents, meanwhile, expressed concerns about affordability, practicality, and timing. I listened, guided, and occasionally intervened to keep the conversation productive. Hours passed, and the tension gradually eased. There were moments of frustration, moments of doubt, but also moments of connection. I found myself negotiating not just the physical aspects of the house, but the emotional ones. The right to honor my childhood, the desire to respect the current owners, and the need to rebuild trust with my parents. By the end of the day, we had reached a preliminary agreement. Terms were outlined, contingencies set, and a timeline established for final decisions. It wasn't complete, and it wasn't perfect, but it was a foundation, a starting point for reclaiming a home that had been more than just a property. It had been a symbol of family, identity, and history. Driving home that evening, I reflected on the journey so far: the house, the memories, the negotiations. They were all intertwined with my own growth. I had learned patience, empathy, and resilience. I had navigated complex emotions, balanced competing interests, and maintained my principles under pressure. Most importantly, I had begun to understand that reclaiming the house wasn't just about possession, it was about healing, reconciliation, and the possibility of moving forward together. I called my parents that night. "We have a path forward," I said, trying to convey both optimism and realism. "It won't be simple and it won't be fast. But we're making progress. We'll take it step by step." Together, their relief was audible, a mix of gratitude and hope. "Thank you," my mother said, her voice trembling. "Thank you for giving us this chance." And in that moment, I realized something crucial. The house was more than walls and a roof. It was a bridge, a chance to reconnect, to rebuild, and to create a future where trust could be restored, where family could heal, and where memories, both old and new, could coexist. As Chapter 9 drew to a close, I understood that the hardest part wasn't negotiating or paying or planning. It was facing the emotions, the history, and the people who had shaped my life. The house was the prize, but the journey was the lesson. And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of hope. Not just for the house, but for what it could represent. A family willing to confront the past and take steps toward a shared future. The days that followed the preliminary agreement were a whirlwind of paperwork, inspections, and financial arrangements. Each step reminded me that reclaiming a childhood home wasn't just about money. It was about patience, negotiation, and navigating layers of emotion I hadn't fully anticipated. The first challenge was the inspection. I walked through every room with the inspector, taking note of structural issues, plumbing quirks, and electrical updates. Some aspects had been improved since my parents sold the house, which eased certain concerns, but others required repairs. I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. Relief that the house was structurally sound, anxiety at the thought of the work ahead. My parents were constantly on my mind. I could hear their voices in my head, pleading, anxious, excited. They had been blindsided once, and now, as we worked to reclaim the house, their emotions were raw and vulnerable. I understood them better than ever. The guilt, the desire to make amends, the hope that reclaiming this house could restore a sense of family and home. The current owners, meanwhile, proved to be more reasonable than I had feared. They had invested in the property, yes, but they were also empathetic to my story. At one point, the owner's daughter approached me in the backyard, her eyes soft with understanding. "We know how much this house means to you," she said quietly. "We hope the memories here can continue, even with you reclaiming it." I was struck by the humanity in that statement. Negotiations often feel transactional, but this moment reminded me that every house carries stories, emotions, and lives lived. The home wasn't just property. It was a vessel of shared history, and respecting that history was crucial. We finalized the terms after days of meticulous discussion. Prices were agreed upon, contingencies finalized, and timelines confirmed. My parents were beside themselves with gratitude, calling repeatedly to make sure everything was proceeding smoothly. I reminded them gently that the process required diligence and care, and that rushing could jeopardize months of effort. The financial arrangements were complex but manageable. I secured a loan with terms favorable enough to cover the purchase without jeopardizing stability. My parents insisted on contributing what they could, even as I reminded them that the responsibility rested with me. It was a delicate dance, balancing familial support, personal investment, and the practicality of modern real estate transactions. The closing day arrived, and with it, a swirl of emotions. Walking through the front door once more, I felt the familiar warmth, the creaking floorboards, the subtle scent of home. My parents stood in the car outside, watching silently, their eyes reflecting a mix of hope, relief, and lingering guilt. Signing the papers was anticlimactic in one sense. It was legal, procedural, and ordinary, but emotionally, it was transformative. Every signature, every stamp, every notarized document represented more than a transaction. It represented reclamation, restoration, and the possibility of new beginnings. After the final signatures, I stepped outside into the sunlight, my hands trembling slightly. My parents ran up to me, embracing me with tears in their eyes. "Thank you," my mother whispered, clinging to my arm. "Thank you for giving us a chance to make things right." In that moment, I realized that the house had always been a symbol, not just of my childhood, but of our family's struggles, mistakes, and resilience. My parents had erred in selling it without consulting me, but through effort, patience, and negotiation, we had reclaimed more than just property. We had reclaimed trust, communication, and a sense of shared purpose. The first night back in the house was surreal. Walking through the rooms, revisiting old corners, and seeing familiar details, I felt a sense of continuity I hadn't thought possible. My parents helped me unpack, and for the first time in months, our home felt whole again. Laughter echoed where there had once been tension, and the shadows of past mistakes seemed less oppressive in the glow of reconciliation. As I lay in my childhood bedroom, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. It had been painful, challenging, and at times overwhelming, but it had also been a testament to patience, resilience, and the capacity of people to learn from mistakes. The house itself seemed to breathe with new life, a silent witness to our journey from conflict to understanding. I knew the road ahead would still have challenges. Relationships take time to heal, memories sometimes hurt, and the past cannot be erased. But reclaiming the house had given us a tangible reminder of what was possible. That even after mistakes, even after missteps, It is possible to rebuild, restore, and move forward together. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. My parents and I established routines, created new memories in familiar spaces, and honored the past without being trapped by it. The house, once a source of tension and heartbreak, became a symbol of hope, a place where mistakes could be acknowledged, lessons learned, and love reaffirmed. Reclaiming the home wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building a future where mistakes didn't define us, where communication and respect guided decisions, and where the walls of a house could hold not just memories, but growth, forgiveness, and a renewed sense of family. As I stood in the backyard one evening, watching the sun set behind the familiar roofline, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey had been long, difficult, and emotional, but it had been worth every step. My childhood home was ours again, not just in ownership, but in spirit, connection, and possibility. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at home.